Good afternoon. The hearing will come to order. I welcome to members of Congress witness hearing for the Interior Environment Appropriations Subcommittee. Today we'll hear from members of Congress on pressing issues ranging from Indian country funding to Great Lakes restoration to the cleanup of abandoned coal mines. Members testifying today represent the interests of both Republicans and Democrats from diverse states and a broad range of ecosystems. Before I begin, I will touch briefly on hearing logistics. I'd like to remind those in the audience that committee rules prohibit use of cameras and audio equipment during the hearing by individuals without House-issued press credentials or an official staff credential from a member that is present at this table. Each witness will have 5 minutes to present their testimony, and we will be using a timer to keep us on track. After we hear each testimony, members will have an opportunity to ask questions. With that, I turn to my friend, my colleague, my ranking member, Mr. Joyce, for any of his remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for continuing this important hearing and to get input from our colleagues on programs in this bill that are important both in their districts across the nation. I applaud my colleagues for bringing the voices of their constituents to this hearing today. Pledge to do what we can to try and be helpful in the coming weeks and months as I work with my chair and the rest of my colleagues on the subcommittee to pass this bill. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joyce. I'd like to turn to my chairman from the Defense Committee, Mr. Visklosky from Indiana, and we're interested in hearing your public testimony. Thank you for being here.
Joan, thank you very much. The first thing I want to do profoundly is to thank both you and the ranking member, Mr. Joyce, for your efforts on behalf of the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. You ensured passage of legislation that provided the first national park for the state of Indiana. And I deeply appreciate that in the Consolidated Act you provided for the welfare of my congressional district. I deeply appreciate your help and the members of the subcommittee. Secondly, relative to parks, as you're well aware, the deferred maintenance backlog is about $11.9 billion and would encourage you to every extent possible to ensure a robust funding. Second priority relates to the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, which essentially has been even for a number of years, which given the rate of inflation means they've had a decrease. The President has exacerbated it in his budget request, and again would ask that you pay special attention to that account. And finally, the third relates to two chemicals, PFOS and PFOA. The chairwoman is very familiar with this. We've had a number of hearings, and we're looking for cooperation between the Department of Defense, EPA, in the setting of standards, and know that we will have that cooperation, and I thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thank you very much, Mr. Visklosky, for your remarks, and I appreciate you bringing up PFAS and PFOA as well. This committee will be looking at that. Mr. Joyce?
I appreciate the being brought up to speed on the matter with the Department of Defense. I'm not knowledgeable, as you both are, but I look forward to that and can help any way I can. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Hope to get out to the Indiana Sands Dune National Park at some point. We did have assigned times for folks, but I think we can take members as they are here. Yeah. Mr. Posey, please come up, and we'll change that out for you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, for having us here today and actually listening to the concerns of members. So much appreciated. This request is for a national priority, but it's also very close to home. Our district is bounded on the east by the Indian River Lagoon. The Indian River Lagoon is North America's most biodiverse estuary. The lagoon is home to over 4,000 animal and plant species, including manatees, dolphins, sea turtles, and several species of seagrass. As the name implies, our estuary is a lagoon, meaning it's an estuary separated from the ocean by barrier islands. Inlets from the ocean provide an exchange of water between the lagoon and the sea. Our lagoon needs tides and storm rain to avoid stagnation. We know that this flushing is limited, especially in the northern end of the lagoon. While the lagoon is 156 miles long, it's only a half a mile to 5 miles maximum in width, and averages just 3 feet in depth. The lagoon is a wondrous nursery for sea life, and its physical features make it especially vulnerable to environmental threats. We depend on citizens, local, state, and federal governments to protect and restore the functions of our lagoon. This objective is not merely aesthetic. A vibrant tourism and fishing industry depends on the lagoon. When our lagoon suffers, so do people. The struggle to preserve the Indian River Lagoon is a fight for our economic sustainability. More is at stake. Preserving the natural functions of our lagoon is an ethical matter. Our community includes the lagoon, and we are part of the lagoon community. Taking care of the lagoon not only takes care of us, but it's the right thing to do. The story of our district and the Indian River Lagoon plays out along the entire national coastline. The entire U.S. coastline depends upon the health of our nation's 28 estuaries. More than half of the U.S. population lives in coastal areas, with the coastal watershed counties providing an estimated 69 million jobs in this country and contributing an estimated $7.9 trillion to the gross domestic product annually. That's why I partnered with Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici to found the Bipartisan Congressional Estuary Caucus to work to advance policies that preserve and restore our estuaries, to support sustained authorization and funding of the National Estuary Program, and to help support other efforts like research and development that contribute to healthy estuaries. I'm pleased to be here today as co-chair of the Congressional Estuary Caucus and to submit to you a request for funding for the National Estuary Program. This program is truly a national response, but is deployed regionally. The NEP is really 28 unique voluntary programs under the Clean Water Act that seek to protect, restore, and improve estuaries of national significance. Each individual designated estuary mobilizes its own local community in a collaborative, non-regulatory investment strategy that meets the local needs while contributing to the national objectives. For every federal dollar the designated regional estuary programs leverage the federal participation with $19 in local funds to protect and improve coastal environments. And I want to repeat that. This is just not, asking for funding by the federal government and not doing their part. It's 19 local and other dollars are leveraged for every federal dollar that goes into this. To improve our coastal environments, our communities, our assets of national significance, and of course our economies. That's great performance for a way we should pursue national programs, federal support with a local delivery system. I respectfully ask that you develop the fiscal year 2020 Interior, Environmental, and Related Agencies Appropriation Act, the committee to continue to fully fund, not increase, the National Estuary Program at the authorized level of $750 million for each, $750,000, I wish, for each of the 28 estuaries, and fund the competitive grants program once again at $4 million. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. Be delighted to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir. Well, we were very disappointed in the president's budget with the zero-out proposed elimination for the National Estuary Program because it's so very important. So I really do appreciate your testimony on this. And as Mr. Cole says, the president proposes and Congress disposes. So as you know, we had this in our bill last year under Chairman Calvert. Exactly the same thing. And tables are first. But it's, so far this has been an interest of both sides of the aisle to work on this stuff, and I just really appreciate your attention to it. Mr. Joyce?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm well aware of the Indian River Lagoon with my parents and brothers having been residents of Vero Beach.
Yeah.
So I've had the opportunity to enjoy it and fish. And one day I'm going to catch an edible snook in the size and slot available. I've never been able to do that, to enjoy one, but it's great fishing and beautiful area. Glad to help. One question. Are you having a problem with the algal blooms?
Oh, heck yes.
Okay.
Every estuary is having a problem with the algae blooms, and it's not just in this country. They're having the same. They've discovered some of the same algae in South America.
Right.
Massive fish kills there. We've had them of, unforeseen proportions previously now. There have been fish kills since I was a little boy, and we could see in the Indian River Lagoon, not just a bottom and not just a fish, but it was clear enough in most cases to tell what kind of fish it was if it was, not too deep.
Sure.
Now you're lucky to see past the surface. Just surface runoff of a whole lot of other problems that population brings, and it's not something that is easy to get the public alerted to, unfortunately, until it reaches really almost disastrous consequences. And everybody says, "Hey, where's everybody been?"
Right.
So, but the federal government, in this funding, the National Estuary Program has been vital and very helpful, and I'm proud of the NEP's participation in all the estuaries, and they're all funded the same. Each estuary gets a base of $750 is what you've historically done, and then the extras is for grants based on a competitive basis, but based on need. So the worst problem would be first in line to get one of the competitive grants, and I think they also look at the bang for the buck. What will do the most good, and so.
Well, the 19-to-1 leverage is certainly
Huh?
the 19-to-1 leverage that you enjoy.
Yes.
With the federal dollars is certainly something to be envied. I have no further questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rooney was in my office talking about some other issues, and this came up as well. So I know it has broad support in your caucus. Thank you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you both so much. Okay.
I see Mr. Gallagher. I'm looking around for some of the other members, not seeing them right now. Mr. Gallagher, welcome.
Wow, I get to go to the front of the line.
You bet.
Very exciting.
The world belongs to those who show up on time. they
That's
say,
right. It's in Green Bay, Wisconsin, we operate by Lombardi time, which is if you're on time, you're 15 minutes late. So,
Well,
Well-
this Viking fan will not hold it against you.
well, rather than stress our differences, I want to talk about something that I'm sure
I
we
would-
agree upon today.
My high school team were the South St. Paul Packers, so
Okay,
we'll leave it
good.
at that.
Good, good. So you're a Packers fan in your own way. Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Joyce. Thank you for the opportunity to address the subcommittee, and particularly for your leadership on behalf of the Great Lakes. I know you and many others on the subcommittee have been tireless advocates for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So while I know I will not be saying anything new today, please bear with me as I spend a bit of time explaining about why I believe this program is so important to Northeast Wisconsin, my home, and beyond. Anyone who's visited the Great Lakes knows they are a national treasure. They not only hold over 20% of the world's freshwater supply, but support thousands of family-sustaining jobs. Industries from agriculture to transportation to tourism depend on the health and the preservation of these waters. These lakes, however, provide for more than just our economy. They provide for a way of life. Lake Michigan is the backyard of my district. From swimming and boating in the summer to ice fishing in the bitter cold winter, Lake Michigan provides countless hours of enjoyment and has a special place in the lives of Northeast Wisconsinites. Given the central role Lake Michigan plays in our community, it should be no surprise that Wisconsinites are passionate about the health of our waters. We do not take threats to our ecosystem lightly. We know all too well that when our agricultural runoff or chemicals contaminate the waters, they make our lakes susceptible to toxic algae outbreaks, which not only damage our ecosystem, but also our way of life. GLRI dollars support projects to counter these threats. In Northeast Wisconsin, we've seen firsthand how successful these projects can be. For example, the Fox River fell victim to side effects from the paper manufacturing industry boom. PCBs, toxic chemicals used in the paper industry from 1954 to 1971. I think the ranking member was alive during that period. I'm sorry, Joyce. Devastated the river and the economies that it supported. Today, the Fox River is still considered a GLRI area of concern, but because of these dollars and the projects they support, we hope to complete the Fox River cleanup next year, and I can't emphasize how important that is for my district and my hometown. This is a landmark achievement for Northeast Wisconsin, and it's just one of the many examples that highlight the significance of GLRI to our waters and our communities. And while we've made progress, we cannot reverse course. Eliminating or reducing funding for GLRI would undo years of this program's achievements and will create extreme uncertainty for the future health of our waters. At a time when we see new contaminants like PFAS threatening our rivers, streams, and lakes, the stakes are simply too high to abandon a program that helps safeguard our natural resources. What's reassuring to me is that even amidst calls for cuts to GLRI, there is bipartisan support for this important initiative. You both are at the leading edge of that, and I'm proud to work with you, to call you my colleagues, and all my other colleagues on both sides of the aisle to lead the way for continued support of GLRI funding. And as we look to the future, we simply must consider how we can build on our GLRI investments. And since GLRI funding has been flat at $300 million since 2014, this year I urge the subcommittee to include at least $300 million in FY 2020, and this is an important investment that my constituents and the health of our waters depend upon. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I appreciate your consideration. Thank you for all the hard work you do.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gallagher. It's very timely that you're here. The president's budget is 90% below the FY19 enacted, and 90% is a cut that to me looks like they're hoping that the program will shut down, not be able to be as successful as it has. And this has been very important to the economy of all the Great Lakes states. And Mr. Joyce and I, representing Great Lakes states, we also look out for the other regional endeavors, whether they be on the East Coast, Chesapeake Bay, West Coast, Puget Sound. So we appreciate you being here. Mr. Joyce, anything you want to add? I have Lake Superior.
We have a lake that's Erie and a tower that's Terminal. But other than that, we're doing fine. Mr. Gallagher, I couldn't possibly agree with you more that the Great Lakes are a national treasure and that we should make a national investment in them and continue national investment to restore them. I don't think it's necessary this presidency. We certainly had problems in our last administration, but it's the people and members of this Congress that stood up and supported, and specifically Madam Chair and this commission and this committee putting together that funding, and we'll look forward to doing it again for you.
Thank you. Well, no matter who you support in the NFC North, we can agree on GLRI and its importance going forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Just watch out for the Browns.
Mr. Comer, please join us up here. We're anxious to hear what you want to share with us.
Chairwoman McCollum, Ranking Member Joyce, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I appreciate the Appropriations Committee allowing members from outside the committee to weigh in on their funding priorities as you craft next year's fiscal appropriations. Today, I'm here to highlight an issue that is a problem threatening not just my congressional district, but our entire inland waterway system. That threat is Asian carp. As many of you know, the term Asian carp refers to 4 species of non-native fish: bighead, silver, black, and grass carp. These species were brought to the United States decades ago, soon entered our major waterways, and have since spread to a considerable portion of our country's interior river system. Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake in my congressional district are home to some of the top outdoor recreational sites in all of Kentucky. Boating, camping, fishing, and other activities have an estimated $1.2 billion economic impact on the region. However, Asian carp threaten that economy. These invasive fish are known to jump out of the water at the sound of approaching boats, striking boaters and skiers. They also eat the food sources of native fish species. All of this is driving boaters and fishers away from our region. As an example, Asian carp are ruining the annual fishing tournaments that draw hundreds of visitors to the area and infuse millions of dollars into the local economy. Last year, I held a field briefing, an oversight committee field briefing, to discuss this subject in Catawba, Kentucky. Over 400 constituents attended and wrote letters to express their concern of the destruction caused by Asian carp. The community sent a clear message. Asian carp are inflicting serious damage on local tourism and threatening our hotels, restaurants, bait shops, and numerous other small businesses. This isn't just a problem in Kentucky. For years, funding to combat the threat posed by Asian carp has been focused on preventing their spread into the Great Lakes, with hundreds of millions dedicated to stopping their spread. However, little funding has been appropriated to controlling and eradicating Asian carp where they already are. Lakes and reservoirs throughout the Southeast are facing similar threats from Asian carp, and members from Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama are all sharing growing concern for our waterways. State agencies utilize State Aquatic Nuisance Species, or ANS, plans to combat the spread of invasive species in their waterways. In fiscal year 2018, we appropriated $2 million for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to support these plans. However, when that funding is distributed amongst the states, that comes out to about $47,000 per state. To better support state-based efforts, I'm asking for a $4.4 million appropriation to support state A&S plans. That would allow for $100,000 per state. In fiscal year 2019, $11 million in U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services funding was dedicated to controlling and eradicating Asian carp. My constituents are grateful for that start, but I believe we can do more. That is why I request $25 million in funding for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services for carp management and report language to clarify that all of our nation's river system is eligible for that funding, not just the upper Mississippi River. Again, thank you for your time today. I look forward to working with you to fund our ongoing war on carp, and I'm happy to address any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. I'm just kind of going over some of the funding that was in the 2019 enacted report. We did have $11 million, but that was provided. We did have report language, which included Mississippi, Ohio River basins, Kentucky Lake Barkley, Tennessee River systems, the Ohio River systems, to prevent them from getting into the Great Lakes. And that was something Mr. McConnell
Right.
over in the Senate was very
It's a
supportive.
priority for McConnell.
It's good to have your voice added to this too, in light of the fact that the president has a reduction in his budget of 28%. I'm assuming, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but the U.S. Geological Survey is a big partner in this, and we also have want to make sure that the USGS included its funding and research in that. Would that be something you'd be supportive of as well?
I would be interested in sitting down and talking to them to see what their plan is, because it's just been devastating on the region, and even though there's been money appropriated in the past, it doesn't seem that any of the dollars have made it to Kentucky. It's the majority, and almost all the money is been focused on trying to keep them from getting into the Great Lakes, because when you have your lakes infested with these fish, you can't imagine that they're 4 to 8 pounds. They jump out of the water. You can't do skiing. You can't do, and it's just had a detrimental effect on the economy. It's a safety issue, and if there's any entity that's got a plan that, other than studying it, if they've got a plan to actually do something to eradicate it, I'm 100% for it.
Well, we're certainly working with USGS on a whole variety of things, not just trying to block them from going any farther, but also research into eradicating the population and that. So we'd be happy to get you some more information on that, because we really would appreciate the support. It's a whole of interior approach.
Absolutely.
on Asian carp, and that also was cut in the president's budget, the USGS portion of it. So we look forward to working with it, and we want to hunt them, kill them, and eat them. And Ms. Pingree on our committee wants to cut them up for bait now for lobster. What other ideas do you have, Mr. Joyce?
We have a company in Kentucky that's purchasing the fish to use as an ingredient in their dog food. It's a national dog food chain company that's using it. So there are uses for it, and we've in Kentucky, with state and a little federal dollars, have been trying to incentivize local fishermen to greatly enhance their fishing of the Asian carp to try to get them out of the water, but it's not even making a dent in the population.
Mr. Joyce?
Thank you. That was one of the questions I was going to have. What was the end use for those that you were fishing? But since I agree with you, Mr. Comer, obviously this is a huge problem. Do you think putting a bounty on Asian carp with a contract fishery is the way to go, or do you think that there's other approaches that we should take to eradicating these completely?
Well, I think that would help. We've through the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife increased the cost share, so to speak, the subsidy, incentive, whatever you want to call it, for local fishermen to try to catch more fish. We have 3 main purchasers of the fish now, and human consumption is one of them. In fact, there's a restaurant in Paducah, Kentucky called the Freight House, and the chef was runner-up in the Top Chef contest that just recently concluded on TV, and one of her main entrees is Asian carp. It's branded as Kentucky bluefin. I think it sounds a little more appealing to the palate. But you know, we're trying to find every use possible. There's a startup that's looking at using it as an ingredient in organic fertilizer. We're just desperate to try to get more commercial fishing in there. There are some studies that I think maybe the Corps of Engineers is doing to try to have some type of mechanism in the water that attracts the fish into a corner to be able to fish them out more. But these fish multiply faster than any species I've ever seen, and it's just a huge problem that it's been studied for a long time, and the residents in the land between the lakes areas are getting pretty impatient now, as you can imagine, because of the devastation of the local economy.
Is there a bounty that they're paying now on the fish?
Yes, there's if you catch so much you're paid per pound, they're incentivizing that. They're doing a double whatever the market rate is. They're adding to that like a cost, like an incentive.
So you're taking it to the guy who's making the fish meal to put in the dog food will pay you $1 a pound.
On top of so much a pound, on top of what the going rate is. And we're trying to help with the companies that are processing the fish, trying to help with their markets. Kentucky Economic Development is working very closely with them. I know the governor and Senator McConnell and my office are in constant communication with the processors now, because we're just trying to do everything possible to get rid of these fish out of the waterways.
Let's hope the businesses don't become too successful with that.
Well, that would be that's good for me. That would be a good end result.
Well, I think you know that Mr. Joyce and I are big fans of not having them come upstream, so we want to do everything we can help you downstream. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And please look into the USGS funding.
I will.
Too.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Congresswoman Hadlin, welcome.
Thank you.
We're very excited to have you here at the Interior Committee hearing.
Thank you so
please.
much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Chairwoman McCollum, Ranking Member Joyce, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to speak today about some key priorities for the Interior and Environment Appropriations Bill. It's an honor to be here with all of you. My district is blessed with natural beauty, 300 days of sunshine per year and more, and abundant wind, and I can vouch for that specifically. I urge you to support the swift transition to clean energy and away from dirty fossil fuels that damage public health and our public lands. As chairwoman of the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands, I urge you to fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund at the newly reauthorized $900 million level to conserve irreplaceable lands and improve outdoor recreation. We must also support areas where the federal government owns land, including much of New Mexico. I urge you to fully fund the payment in lieu of taxes and secure rural schools programs. And I'm committed to finding a permanent SRS, secure rules, try saying that 3 times fast, secure rural schools program solution for forest counties. As one of the first Native American women elected to Congress and co-chair of the Native American Caucus, I urge you to address the serious problems Indigenous people face. The funding needs of American Indians and Alaska Natives on reservations and in urban areas must be a priority to begin to work toward fully honoring the federal government's unique government-to-government relationship and trust responsibility to Indian tribes. This trust responsibility arose from the forced surrender and reduction of Aboriginal lands to the United States, which resulted in a significant loss of life and great suffering. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Broken Promises report analyzes federal spending on fundamental services for American Indians and Alaska Natives, all of which are required by treaties, statutes, and established federal trust agreements. This report details the underfunding and neglect of federal obligations for decades that has gone on, and the breach of the U.S. government's trust responsibility. Based on this, I will introduce legislation aimed at correcting these budgetary shortfalls and reaffirming the trust responsibility that we have to tribes. One issue I want to highlight is public safety. The underfunding of tribal law enforcement and justice system directly contributes to Native Americans experiencing one of the nation's highest rates of crime and victimization in the United States. Department of Justice found that more than 4 in 5 American Indian Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lives, and 56.1% have experienced sexual violence. Additionally, Native Americans are being killed in police encounters at a higher rate than any other racial or ethnic group. The Bureau of Indian Affairs funding for law enforcement is currently at about 20% of the overall need, and tribal court funding is only a dismal 3% of the need. And there is no funding available to address the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women in urban areas or state courts, contributing to the gap in data collection. Healthcare is another area where the federal budgetary shortfall is most apparent for Native Americans and Indian tribes. Chairwoman McCollum, I appreciate the hard work this subcommittee has done to boost funding for the Indian Health Service, and I encourage you to continue those efforts. The Indian healthcare delivery system still spends only 40% of the national average per patient, which leaves American Indians and Alaska Natives among the most vulnerable populations, as many basic patient needs are unmet. I urge you to make equitable and non-discretionary federal funding available directly to tribal nations to uphold the well-established government-to-government relationship tribes have with the United States and provide funding for services that most Americans have adequate access to, but that American Indians and Alaska Natives do not. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Congresswoman Hadlin. It's good to have your voice at the table. A couple of things I would touch on that you're probably, you highlighted so eloquently is how far we fall short of public safety in Indian country. Mr. Joyce and I were here when we heard, we had Public Witness Day from our tribal nations. We heard from them loud and clear about public safety, very, very much so. And some of that's in our budget, some of it's in other budgets, and we're working to do what we can in that. But the President has not been very helpful in the budget that the administration put forward for the issues that you addressed. I wanted to just touch on PILT for the record. PILT used to be mandatory funding. They made it discretionary funding and put it into the Interior bill. I believe it rightfully belongs as mandatory funding, and am working as hard as I can with colleagues, and would appreciate your support in moving that back over to the mandatory funding where it belongs. It is a tax issue. It belongs in the tax bill. That would free up more dollars for Indian country to work on many of the priorities that you laid out, as well as I'm with you on it, renewable energy, land and water conservation, and other things that we share to work on. So hopefully we don't have too much more in the way of flooding. I know Nebraska, some of the tribal nations in Nebraska have been suffering. We heard about Pine Ridge. We've been following that too. So we will work with you in your capacity with Mr. Cole as we hear more about the emergency situations in those tribal nations. Mr. Joyce?
Thank you. Ms. Holland? Sincere congratulations on your being the first of 2 Native Americans who were elected here, and you certainly glad to have your seat at the table. I fully recognize that the federal government has not lived up to their end of the obligation to the tribal nations. It's something that, as somebody from Ohio, wasn't necessarily on my screen, if you will, when I first got here to Congress, but since I've been on Interior in the beginning and I've followed through with the things that have happened in all of Indian affairs, we're lucky at times because not only have the chairwoman, but also at one point we had Mr. Cole and Mr. Simpson and Mr. Calvert all on the committee at one time. So it's an education process, and it's something that we were going to continue to do what we can here to make sure that we at least have the funding to try to honor those obligations that we've already entered into. So please feel free at any time, not just it's member hearing day, but any time we can be of help of reaching out, and be glad to do whatever we can to help you.
Thank you so much, and I absolutely will. Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Joyce, we have a few other members who our time changed because of votes, and we have their testimony. I'd like to enter it into the record. They're unable to change their schedules to be here now, and if that's okay with you,
Fine by me.
fine, okay. So moved. So with that, we will conclude on today's hearing from members of Congress on the appropriations for interior environment. Thank you.